various genres and subgenres that have come out of independently producing a video game, one that's carved one of the healthiest subculture of creators is the classic point-and-click style adventure game. For over a decade now, through tools like the Adventure Game Studio, we've seen several long-running series and even auteurs pop up from this long-forgotten style of computer program. Whether it be established developers and publishers such as the Wedget Eye team or Amanita Design, or to come from well-regarded freeware developers like Ben Chandler, point-and-click adventure games have managed to keep their reputation for decades with strong storylines, beautiful artwork, and interesting gameplay. I could have easily dedicated this entire web series to this often overlooked subgenre. And considering how larger studios like Telltale Games and even the kings of the subgenre at Double Fine are even entering the fray, one could even say that we've entered a silver age of the genre of point-and-click adventures. That is, if I'm getting my graphic novel similes right. DC still owns Howard the Duck, right? The beginning of what's promising to be a great gem to emerge out of the Silver Age is one I've been clamoring to spotlight in my little program for a while. The Journey Down, Chapter 1, Over the Edge. The first chapter began as a freeware game by Swedish developer, and I really hope I'm pronouncing this right, Theodore Warren of Sky Goblin as a way to test the capabilities of the Adventure Game Studio. The first game was a mostly one developer's show, while bringing on different help and different testers from the AGS community, along with a completely original soundtrack which I'll get to later. It was launched on the Adventure Game Studio site in August 2010 and went to receive a very respectable amount of praise, at least for a freeware game. It's been downloaded on the website over 30,000 times and is even featured as the best freeware adventure game in 2010 by the Indie Games weblog. Theodore found himself enjoying the project quite a bit. The only way he saw it continuing was to convince his fellow Sky Goblins for a full commercial HD remake of the first chapter. He was indeed able to convince his team to be able to continue the project in HD, and Theodore recalls that it must have been his Bambi eyes that convinced them to go forward. For this review, I'll mostly be going over the HD version while discussing a few changes from the original low-res alpha version. The game tells the story of Bwana and Kito, two down-on-their-luck charter owners who can't seem to pay their electric bills.
Oh man, Bwana, we've been owned!
Lena, a professor's assistant working from the university, comes to them looking for a book. Working on adventure game logic, she realizes that a charger/gas station is the perfect place to find illegal literature. The illegal literature in question is called The Journey Down, a book detailing the forbidden subject of the Underland. Outside of the city, there's an edge of the world with a land underneath everybody that somebody's trying to cover up any kind of information on.
Kid, you gotta be careful even mentioning its name. Ask too many questions and you disappear.
With Lena needing a flight to the Underland and Bwana and Kito needing to get rid of their debt, they decide to team up to explore the forbidden Underland. After Bwana gets his rust-bucketed 20-year-old ship in order, of course. Sky Goblin have created a really interesting world here with a very compelling mystery to unravel. The tone of the game has a lot of film noir elements with its saxophone and kind of dark themes with its henchmen, but it's mostly a lighthearted comedy. The characters throughout the adventure are a lot of fun to hang out with, such as the main character Bwana. He has a very laid-back attitude about life, and the whole tone of the game is very chill. You might run into one or two people who aren't exactly the nicest around, but for the most part, everybody is very polite and well-mannered. I can think of a number of point-and-click adventure games where everybody's kind of a jerk to you for wanting a fishing pole or rope or any other object, so it's a pretty refreshing change of pace to see the minor characters being ones I wouldn't mind hanging out with.
Free food, please!
In your sweet Bwani's dreams, Bwana.
The game also does a good job of developing the characters beyond just a likable personality. We learn the backstories of Bwana and Kito and how their father figure, Kaunandudu, left without a trace and who I suspect will probably play a larger part in the story. The puzzles in the game are mostly inventory based and the main goal is to gather parts for the plane. You'll be walking around looking and mixing items or talking to different characters trying to get hints as to what to do next. One of the key differences between the low-res version and the HD version is that a few more puzzles and rooms were added to the original game while making a few locations a bit easier to find. The docks in the low-res version was off in the background behind the charter, where the HD version makes them right to the bridge and much more visible. I found the puzzles in the game to be fairly easy in comparison to other adventure games like the Monkey Island series or the Deponia series, but I appreciate that. Old school adventure gamers may be a bit disappointed with the ease of the puzzles, but I found them to be very well balanced. I didn't have to do a whole lot of experimentation to be able to figure out what I was supposed to do. To me, a good adventure games puzzle should be me going, oh, I'm a dunce for not being able to solve that, as opposed to how in Tim Schafer's facial hair was I supposed to figure that out. I never needed a walkthrough for any of the game, and while some items can be a bit too well hidden, one ingredient for the spice mix comes to mind, there's nothing here to me that brings everything to a grinding halt. The extra puzzles, like fixing the phone in the HD version, are very straightforward to solve and fit right into the game's chill theme. They're not overly complicated, where you'll have to spend an hour figuring out its cryptic nature, a la something like The Seventh Guest, but it still offers a nice and fair amount of challenge to mixing its items or getting into different extra puzzles. One of my favorite puzzles here being operating the crane, and I'm not going to spoil it here.
These buttons make no sense!
The presentation of the game is just gorgeous. One of the cool things it has to offer is that it was inspired by actual African masks for the design of its characters. Theodore writes that creating masks is an art honed in over centuries to evoke the simplicities of emotion. What could possibly be better suited as a means for portraying a character's feelings? In fact, some of the characters' names come from the Swahili language. Matoke is a type of banana, and Bwana means man or sir. African culture is such an underused thing in media today, and it's refreshing to see it being used here.
Coffee! Jah be praised!
The backgrounds are wonderfully painted and drawn, while the characters are very well animated. The original alpha looks pretty nice and hand-painted, but the new HD coat of paint really gives it a step above the original. There isn't an oversaturation of detail here, and the character designs are very simple but still instantly recognizable. It also meshes very well with the puzzles, where the visual design lets you know what you need in order for you to get through. You won't have to do a whole lot of pixel hunting to be able to find what you're looking for. The sound design is also a big highlight here. The HD version features full voice acting for all of the dialogue, and for the most part it's really great. There are two characters, the chef and the doorman, that are a bit on the stereotypical side, but the rest of the cast works pretty well. Anthony Sardina voices Bwana and brings a lot of life to the character, and again, it's a really cool person to hang out with.
Tear my head off? That's not a very nice thought.
It's been criticized for all the voice acting not bringing a whole lot to the table, but honestly, I could listen to someone like Makito's voice all day.
A good chef and a fine spice can fix the foulest stew right up.
The music and soundtrack might just be my favorite part of the game. It's a mix of jazz and reggae performed and composed by Simon de Souza, and my apologies if I butchered that name. It's a wonderful meshing of dark themes that are very noir-esque and more tropical, laid-back themes that just fits so perfectly with what the game is going for. It's very heavy on saxophone, and one track in particular on the docks where the sax plays a version of Drunken Sailor just gives the area so much more added character. I believe it was the entire soundtrack for the low-res version, and it's a big highlight in the HD version as well. It's one I certainly found myself humming long after I played the game and again, even editing this video. In terms of the flaws, most of them are very nitpicky. One of the major frustrations are the frame rates in between the rooms. There's a lot of slowdown that you'll have to contend with at times, but it doesn't get in the way of the major parts of the game. Unfortunately, one of the biggest issues here with the entire game is the rate in which the games are coming out. I'm kind of at a loss for giving a really in-depth, detailed review of this game because I'm only reviewing Chapter 1. Sky Goblin has set up an interesting world, likable characters, and an interesting story going with some solid puzzle design, but so far there's not really a whole lot beyond that. There's cool conversations in between the different characters, but there aren't really a whole lot of arcs or changes with anybody, and I can't really expect that for this being the first part of the adventure. The journey down so far is promising to be a great story, and unfortunately that's all it is right now. Promising. Episodic gaming and adventure games, especially ones involving a mystery, isn't something I think really works, especially for indie games. The low-res version of The Journey Down Chapter 1 came out in 2010, the HD remake in 2012, and now it's 2014, almost 4 years after that first release, and we're finally getting Chapter 2. I understand that Sky Goblin and teams working on games like The Dream Machine or Kentucky Route Zero are working with very limited resources, but wait times as long as these really hinder my interest in their games. Telltale Games kinda gets away with it because they get their chapters out there at a more consistent rate, but only getting the first half of something like Broken Age without much of any news about the second half is a really huge tease. Again, in Sky Goblin's defense, they are working on their very first commercial game here, and they have been giving a great number of different updates through their blog and on their Twitter accounts. It also kind of presents a greater problem, not just with adventure games. Whenever I see a game is in early access or in beta or not really finished, it makes me kind of cringe a little bit. Not to say that every indie dev putting a price tag on an early beta isn't all out terrible. Action Hank and Broforce are both pretty fun games and are still in open beta. Indie developers have to find ways to get people interested in their games with limited resources, and opening it up to betas or releasing it in chunks does make sense to be able to have long-lasting value. It's also a way for the team to get some money to be able to support themselves and make the games and to keep the lights on, but I'm always genuinely more interested in the game if I know the entire game is there already. It's a problem that people like Sky Goblin and many other developers are trying to figure out how to do it. And for the meantime, this individual chapter does have a price tag for itself, and I can say I very much enjoyed my time with it. The chill tone and interesting world it presents have stuck with me, even with the long wait times for the story. The journey down Chapter 1 is a relatively short affair, being roughly about 3 hours to beat it, and playing it again for this video, it still brought a lot of joy to me. I do recommend the Journey Down's first chapter for its polish, its charm, its characters, and especially its soundtrack. The low-res version is still available for free on the AGS website, and the HD version can be picked up over on Steam and the iOS. We can only hope that the next chapter will be just as memorable, but for right now, Over the Edge is very much worth exploring. Happy adventuring!
Later, lady.
See you around, Buona.
Thank you for watching this little review today. Next week, I'll have a full look at the second chapter in the series, and in the meantime, there's a cool pre-order sale for both games where half the revenue goes to a charity in Tanzania. I'll have Lena from the game explain it a little better.
Half of the revenue from the pre-orders will go to Malvino Secondary School in Tanzania, a boarding school for girls constructed with support from Engineers Without Borders.
The pre-order gets you the first game right away and the second once it's released. If you enjoyed what I did here, feel free to check out my latest review on Shovel Knight. Thanks again!